Hey, what's up everybody? This is Joe Mixdowns with Intention Music Tech, and today I'm going to be showing you everything you need to know about one of the most important mix tricks in the game, which is parallel compression. So let's go. But first, before we get into the tutorial, if you need a professional mix and master and want me to mix your music, go to jobmixdowns.com or click the link in the description and follow the fast and easy 3-step process. And remember, all of my mixing and mastering services have a 100% money back guarantee to make sure you're completely satisfied with the final result. So the idea behind parallel compression is taking a heavily compressed audio signal and blending it and mixing it to a dry or lightly compressed audio signal as a way to maintain our transient response and keep our transient response intact, which sometimes just putting a compressor directly on a track doesn't allow us to do in the most effective way. So parallel compression is mostly used on vocals and drums, but of course it can be used on any instrument if you're trying to get a little more punch or a little more presence out of it. And a really cool trick that I like using parallel compression with is putting it on my whole track. So I'll either put it on my mix bus or my master fader to really put some life into my track and get punch out of the whole track. So there's two ways to go about setting up your parallel compression, and the first way and the easiest way is just by simply using the mix knob on your compressor. So most modern compressor plugins have a mix knob on them, and just by you simply adjusting the wet and dry signal is a form of parallel compression. And the second way to set up your parallel compression is through an effect send. And this is the way that I like doing it, simply because it allows for more versatility when we're applying our parallel compression, which I'm going to show you a little bit later on in the video. So now that you understand what parallel compression is, let's jump into the tutorial so I can show you how to set up your compressor and show you what settings to use for parallel compression, how to set up your effect sends, and show you just how powerful this technique really can be when we apply it to our vocals, our drums, and our whole mix bus. So this is a compressor I use a lot. This is the Slate Digital FG Gray, and this is what I'm going to use to show you the compression settings. So when we're setting up our parallel compression, we generally want our threshold to be very high. We really want to push the compressor. So anywhere between -25 to -30 dB for compression for the threshold is always going to be a good starting point. And then the ratio, again, we really want to push the compressor, so we really want to crank that ratio up. And that can be anywhere from 8:1 to even up to 15:1 if your compressor goes that high. So this particular compressor only goes to 10:1 ratio. So I usually do it between 8 and 10:1 ratio. And then as far as the attack is concerned, we really want to make sure that our transients are able to pop through. So generally, I'll have a slower attack, and what a slow attack does is allow more transients to pop through. So I'll usually have it kind of in the middle. I might even have it at 1 millisecond. It just kind of depends, but I want it a little bit slower so the transients can pop through. And then because of that, I'm going to want a faster release if I want the transients to pop through as well. And then as far as the makeup gain, it would be essentially the same as just using any compressor. We just want to get that gain reduction back. So these are good starter settings when you're working with parallel compression, and then you adjust to taste as you need to. So now we're going to look at applying parallel compression to our vocals, and we're going to show you the two ways that we set up parallel compression. So one is using the mix knob on the compressor, and that's what I'm going to show you first. And then I'm going to set it up through an effect send and use that technique throughout the rest of the tutorial. So let's just play this vocal here. By the way, the name of the artist is enanita, and she's a great artist from here in Vancouver. And we're going to use her song Love Stick for this tutorial. So let me just play the song. We don't have any compression. I've dialed in these rough settings here, and the mix is on full. So I'm just going to play this without compression.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere
So now here's with these rough compression settings, parallel compression settings that I've put on.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere
So I've adjusted the ratio and I've pushed the threshold up to try and get our gain reduction a little bit more. We're kind of tickling 20 dB, which is generally what I go after. But as you can see, it's really squashed. So what I'm going to do now is just pull back the mix knob to taste.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere
So again, that sounds pretty good to me. We've compressed the vocal, but we've still maintained some transients. And what I'm going to do now is just A-B it as the vocals by itself.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere
So as you can see, we have maintained our transients and at the same time we have the vocal compressed. So, and that's just by using the mix knob here. Let's play this in context of the mix.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere
So that is using parallel compression with the mix knob, and as you can see, it's very effective. So now let's get into setting up an effect send and using parallel compression that way. Okay, so I'm going to approach this assuming that you already know how to set up effect sends in whatever DAW that you're using. So I have my parallel compression effect send set up here, this orange track, and I'm using the same compressor, the FG Gray. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to take copy and paste the compressor from the track here because we already have the settings dialed in. And then I'm just going to mute this compressor here. And I'm going to show you how this works using parallel compression with an effect send. So I'm just going to bring up my parallel compression fader. And let's check this out.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere
So now we're always watching our gain reduction here. And then, of course, we're always listening as well. So I pushed this fader up to 0 dB. So we're getting quite a bit of gain here. And this is one of the reasons actually why I also like using an effect send, because when you push up the fader, it also just pushes the compressor more and gives it a little more oomph. And you can hear that here. So I'm going to A-B it.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere
So as you can see, there's a very big difference there. It's pushing it out a lot more. We're still maintaining the transients, but that vocal's really popping out. So let's play it in context of the mix, and I'm going to A-B it again.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere llorando por teléfono gritando que me quiere
So as you can see, without the parallel compression, it's just kind of, it's there, it's nice, but it's not popping out of the mix like it is with the parallel compression. So you can see it's really, really powerful tool. So before we move on, there's some quick tips that I really want to share with you that are really powerful, that can really take your parallel compression to the next level, and they're really easy to apply. So let's check this out quick. So what we're going to look at here is adding effects to our parallel compression, effect send. And this is one of the main reasons why I prefer to use an effect send to apply my parallel compression, because it gives us more versatility and it allows us to add effects to our parallel compression to make it even more powerful. And a very common thing to do to parallel compression is add an EQ to our parallel compression. And this is actually where the phrase New York compression came from. I'm sure some of you have heard about New York compression, and essentially it is parallel compression, but the actual idea behind New York compression is to add EQ to it. So there's a lot of things we can do, but just the basic things that I like to do is just add a high end or low end shelf to the vocal or whatever we're applying the parallel compression to. So let's bring in this EQ and just check this out here.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere.
So I'm just going to exaggerate it first so you guys can hear what it's doing, and then I'm going to pull it down to taste.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando.
So I've just shelved it here up, looks like about 5 dB. And I'm going to A-B it so you can hear how it sounds.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono.
So if you feel that your vocal or whatever you're working on needs to be brightened up a bit, this is a great way to actually do it in a subtle way. And we can also do it with the low end. So let's try and beef up the low end.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere.
So these are just subtle ways that we can EQ our audio and not have to do it directly on the track, which we just might not get the results we want. So this is a very common technique to use with parallel compression, is adding EQ. And another thing that I like to do is adding stereo width plugins to my parallel compression chain. So I'm actually going to pull up this wider plugin, because this is a free stereo width plugin. So it's available to everybody. And this is something I don't do on every track, but I like to try it out and see if it works. So let me just quickly show you how this sounds.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono.
So again, I'm going to exaggerate it and pull it back to taste.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono.
So again, it's a great way to get a little bit more width out of our vocal, and it just pops out of the mix a little bit more. So these are settings that obviously you can play with, and it's going to vary from track to track, from vocal to vocal, but it's a really cool technique. So let me just quickly A/B the EQ and the stereo width so you can see what both of them have done.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere.
So that, of course, has the vocal sound a little bit brighter, a little bit deeper, and a little bit wider. And these are techniques that I do on my parallel compression, just because sometimes, again, if we put it directly on the track, it just might not get the feel and the sound that we want. So these are just some great tips and techniques that you can use to play around with parallel compression moving forward. So before I move on, I just want to quickly mention one thing. When we're setting up parallel compression and we're using them in different instances, such as for vocals and then separately for drums and then separately for another instrument or on our whole mix bus, we want to make sure that we're setting up our effect sends for each different instance. So if we're using vocals, we have a separate effect send for that vocal. If we're using drums and we're using parallel compression on our drums, we want to have a separate effect send for our drums and so on. And I'm going to show you why this is very important. So if we look at our session here, so I have the parallel compression set up on my vocals. If I were to use this parallel compression effect send on my drums, it would be using the compression on the drums and the vocal at the same time, and it just wouldn't be quite as effective. So this is something very important. When I first started doing this, I didn't realize this, and I was using one parallel compression effect send for all of my parallel compression, and it just wasn't working. So make sure we have separation for each different parallel compression instance. This is very important. So now let's get into seeing how parallel compression sounds on our drums. So here I have our drums. There's not too many drums in this particular beat, and I have my FG gray again here, and I do have some settings already dialed in as far as our parallel compression. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to mute it right now, and I'm just going to play the drums to see what we have here. Okay, so it sounds good. So now I'm going to dial in the parallel compression. So that sounds really good. I might pull back the attack a little bit. Now let's A/B it. So as you can see, there's a huge difference. As soon as we apply that parallel compression, it really starts making those drums pop. So let's do it in context of the mix so you can really get an idea of how good this sounds. So there's a big difference. Our drums are really, really popping when we apply that parallel compression. And this is just, it just seems to work most instances. And this is why I apply parallel compression on most of my tracks. So now that we know how it sounds on the drums, let's take a look and see how it sounds on the whole mix bus. So just really quickly, there's something important that I want to explain to you guys. So whenever we're routing our parallel compression to our main track, whether it's on the master fader, depending on what DAW you're using. In Pro Tools in particular, you're not able to use sends and returns on your master fader, so you have to set it up through a main mix bus. And again, if you see here, the routing is very important. So I have it routed to my master fader. My other effect sends with my parallel compression are routed to my mix bus. But if you're using it on your main mix bus for your whole track, you want to make sure that the output is routed to the master fader. Otherwise, the parallel compression is not going to work properly because it's not routed correctly. So always make sure if you're using this technique on your main master bus that it's routed to your master fader. This is very important. And again, I'm using a different effect send. This is my mix bus parallel compression, and this is a different effect send that I'm using for my vocals, and it's also a different one than I'm using for my drums here. So these things are very important when you're first starting to learn how to use parallel compression, to make sure that everything is routed properly and make sure that your effects ends are separated. So let's take a look at how parallel compression sounds on our whole mix here.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que quiere ser mío, pero mi corazón está frío, todo mojado como río.
So as you can see here, when I pushed it up, it's just getting squashed because we're applying compression to the whole track. So generally I don't want it to be that squashed, so I'm going to adjust the threshold and pull it back a bit.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que quiere ser mío, pero mi corazón está frío, todo mojado como río. Soy la mala en la jugada, nadie me para o compara. Messi en la calle, camino con la pierna izquierda, esta puta le.
Okay, so now that I have it dialed in, let's A-B it and see how it sounds.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que quiere ser mío, pero mi corazón está frío, todo mojado como río. Soy la mala en la jugada, nadie me para o compara. Messi en la calle, camino con la pierna izquierda, esta puta le hago mierda, jaja. Quítate mi way, cerda, only walking one way, recta. Soy la que manda la matatán, como aquello de su día de Culiacán. Si estás en olla, no me.
So as you can see, it's a really big difference as well. Now, this technique for me personally doesn't work every time when I'm applying it on my mix bus, but a lot of times it does. And when it does, it just really, really works. So let's just hear that one more time.
Dice que me quiere y yo le digo gracias chévere, llorando por teléfono, gritando que me quiere, me quiere. Dice que quiere ser mío, pero mi corazón está frío, todo mojado como río. Soy la mala en la jugada, nadie me para o compara. Messi en la calle, camino con la pierna izquierda, esta puta le hago mierda, jaja. Quítate mi way, cerda, only walking one way, recta. Soy la que manda la matatán, como aquello de su día de Culiacán.
So as you can see, if you're applying parallel compression to your whole mix bus, sometimes you don't even need to add compression when you're doing your mastering. So just across the board, this is just a very, very effective technique that you can utilize on every part and every aspect of your mix. So thanks for watching. I hope you really enjoyed this content. Always make sure that you check out my website at intentionmusictech.com to get access to my free mixing courses. We have the Pro Lead Vocal Mixing Clinic and the Savage Beats Mixing Clinic, where I share with you my favorite tips and techniques that I've learned over years. And these are free mini courses that you can get access to on my website. All you got to do is sign up, join the community, and enjoy. So thanks again. I'll see you guys next time.